Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Myles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Glad to have you here. If you like what we're doing, please hit like and subscribe. It's a passive gesture that goes a long way. If you're a returning listener, so glad to have you back. I am joined here with longtime TIR crew member. He is part of the very elite of TIR. He is the designer of our thumbnails. He is the man that made that intro that you saw, that you guys love loving and complaining about. He is everyone's favorite professor at Missouri State University. He is the mean Jean Bajlan.
Hi, Jason. Nice to be with you.
It is so wonderful to be back with you. For those of you guys watching the show, this is pre-recorded. So the plus side is we cannot respond to your mean comments. The negative side is we can't respond to your mean comments. That being said, please don't let that dissuade you from putting said mean comments on the chat with the super chat. We're not opposed to super chats at all. Now, the show today is something I was talking to Gene about the other day, and he put this together with relative ease and expedience. I mentioned it to you once, and you go, I know a guy. And next thing I know, we're putting this show together, which I'm really excited to do. Can the international courts bring Israel to justice? Recently, in response to the ongoing attacks against the Palestinian people, the nation of South Africa has brought charges against Israel for violating the 1948 Genocide Convention, which both Israel and Palestine are party to. According to South Africa, the killing of Palestinians in Gaza in large numbers, especially children, destruction of their homes, their expulsion and displacement, blockade on food, water, and medical assistance to the Strip, the imposition of measures preventing Palestinian births by destroying essential health services crucial for the survival of pregnant women and babies are all listed as genocidal actions in the suit. Israel is, of course, arguing that what South Africa and other nations are calling a genocide is, in fact, self-defense. They are protecting themselves from Hamas and claim Hamas wants to eradicate the inhabitants of Israel. What will the court decide, and what does this mean for the ongoing devastating conflict? We bring in lawyer Fakhry FB Taha to discuss. Please welcome Fakhry. You know it's serious when the guest wears a tie. Just want you to know.
Yeah, hello everyone.
How are you?
I'm good. I can add upon the introduction if you want. So
Please do.
I worked in treaty law, international treaty law, and I worked in a sister convention to the convention on genocide, which is the 1973 Apartheid Convention.
Mm-hmm.
Both are similar.
Mm-hmm.
Both have even the big name of the conventions is the Convention on the Suppression and Punishment for Apartheid / Genocide. So they are very similar. They come from the same neighborhood. And Gene asked me if I can be on to discuss the case, and I downloaded it, the case, and even like for someone who worked in international law, when the South Africa case starts with 3 words: application instituting proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds too much general for me, too much for anyone, too much confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a deep dive to understand the nature of the case, even for someone who has studied law or is working in international law.
What is the case that South Africa is bringing, the ICJ case that South Africa is bringing?
So when we talk about the international courts, it is similar to courts within a domestic legal system. You
Okay.
have your parking ticket court,
Mm-hmm.
or you have your contract obligations court. You know, someone screwed you over with a card, they sold you a card anyway. And you have a criminal court. So you have the International Criminal, the International Court of Justice. That's the civil law court
Mm-hmm.
of disputes between states. It was designed with, the statute of the court is fused with the Charter of the United Nations. And what is the two main things that the United Nations care about? International security and international security, uh, international security and international law,
Mm-hmm.
peace, international peace and international security.
Mm-hmm.
So if states go to that court instead of going to war, everybody's going to be happy. There will be no wars, no more wars. That's the goal of the court. It's about solving not criminal disputes but civil disputes. Could be disputes on land, could be disputes on water, could be disputes on different kind of treaties. Uh, you know, diverse treaties, energy treaties, um, uh, economy treaties, farming treaties. And you have the International Criminal Court, which was established in 1998 through a statute called the Rome Statute. It wasn't established, but the Rome Statute was adopted. A very confusing thing about international law. There is an adoption uh, history or adoption year,
Mm-hmm.
and there is an implementation or entry into force year. So some people will tell you that the Genocide Convention is the Genocide Convention of 1951. Some people will tell you the Genocide Convention is the Genocide Convention of 1948. Both are right because it was adopted in 1948 and then it entered into force in 1951. That's a big confusing thing that always confuses me. Um, and the criminal court is pretty much interesting because it's about not disputes per se between states, disputes, but it's about the prosecution of individuals who committed crimes internationally. These are crimes that are committed during the time of war, or even outside of the time of war, crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity, they could be inside war or outside war. War crimes, they're inside war. What the 1998 Rome Statute done was putting genocide above all crimes. So it
Hmm.
could be considered that it's a crime against humanity or a war crime, colloquially. If we're
And
talking.
was that in reaction to what was happening in the Balkans?
Eh, I'm not sure about the history of it, but there were
Mm,
several ad hoc courts historically,
mm,
starting with Nuremberg,
mhm,
Tokyo. I'm not an expert of what is in the middle, and then you had the Balkans. What
mhm,
is in the middle, which is Cold War. Now I know a lot about Cold War because I have studied it from other perspectives, not from a perspective of international criminal law. Uh, but and then you had the Balkans, and you
mhm,
had you had international trials that are starting in the fifth season of The Simpsons, and finishing up at the 25th season. They're that long, you know.
Yeah.
Like it's a detriment that the 90s weren't the innocent era. So the international criminal the statute of the International Criminal Court elevated genocide. It's a different.
Mhm.
I remember something interesting Gene said, which is, you know, what is the difference between colonization and criminal acts of the state, ethno-national state, or using chemical weapons or using high explosive weapons in dense areas? No, the court was like, no, it's above. Genocide is above. It's different. It is different. The same way, there is work to make, okay, high explosive weapons and chemical weapons, they might not be different. There have been some works into criminalizing the use of nuclear weapons because nuclear weapons, okay, they're above even other weapons of mass destruction. So genocide was above. But going back to the International Court of Justice, how it is a treaty that is about international criminal law is being followed in the civil law court, the International Criminal Court. This is where we come into the complications. You know, this is why it is a bit confusing. According to Article 74, a state in the ICJ statute, a state that is member to the United Nations can initiate urgent measures, ask urgent measures from the ICJ to stop harm. Now, there is something that is called in civil law harm. If you're doing something that is harming the road or harming the Nimbic people, not in my backyard people, you know, they can go to the court and stop it until they see what is the matter. So the goal of South Africa is to stop harm. That does not mean that it doesn't the South Africa case does not have any criminal. Of course, anything that is used and everything that is said and proved in this court is going to be valuable for the ICC, for the International Criminal Court. Now, and in provisional measure number 6 that is asked from South Africa to the court to stop the harm is criminal. They are asking from Israel to initiate domestic criminal proceedings to follow individuals and actors against individuals and actors that have engaged or incited genocide.
So just to clarify, would a good analogy for this be the South Africa is trying to get an injunction against Israel. So it's like getting an injunction for having someone not be able to come around you for let's say domestic abuse or something like that until that's cleared up in the courts later on.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it's not exactly going to the full genocide case, but rather they're going to this, trying to get this emergency injunction to stop this military operation on the grounds that it's genocidal. And then later on, there might be a different case directed against certain individuals accused of genocide.
Exactly. So Article 74 of the ICJ statute, Article 41 of the ICJ statute and 74 of the rules of procedures of the court, that's another law under the court, both give the ICJ this power to do so. Now, when your neighbor has domestic abuse, you can call on it and you can be a good citizen and call on it. But that's a little bit different from the case here, because the upholding of international law, especially erga omnes obligations before all, is everybody's obligation. So in Article 9 of the Convention on against Genocide, gives state parties the power to go to the ICJ. If there's a problem with the interpretation of the convention, the treaty, and that is very common in all treaties, problems in intervention. No, this means this, this means this. The Chinese language version of the treaty is different from the Arabic and the English language, so on and so forth. But also, they specify that if someone is violating it, they can go to the court, to the International Court of Justice. Why? Because in 1948, we did not have the ICC. Nuremberg was not a fixed thing. It was related to a certain international incident, although Nuremberg is one of the bases of the history of International Criminal Court. And South Africa, as a part of the Genocide Treaty, as party, State of Palestine is a party, Israel against it is a party, but South Africa as a party, not as a good Samaritan, they saw that the treaty was heavily being violated, and then they went for the ICJ to what amounts to asking for a ceasefire to stop harm, to halt harm.
So South Africa has standing to bring this case because it's party to this Convention on Genocide, and Israel is technically subject to it because they are also party to this Treaty on Genocide.
There is something also. There's also something that is confusing about the United Nations system. You would hear about some state, I don't know from where, in which region of the world, filing for an important resolution or filing for a case before the court, or filing in this state, and you would ask like, what this state? Why this state? Why not another? Why not Namibia? Why not an Arab state? And it's because only one state can present cases. At least one state should. But that does not mean that there are 50 other states that has consulted with South Africa before they've done so.
Right. So the fact that South Africa is leading this case doesn't mean South Africa was the only country wanting to bring the case, but rather in consultation, it is South Africa who's kind of been deputized to bring this case towards the International Court because of the nature in which you apply to that court.
Most likely, yes. And I don't know a lot about who consulted with who, but the word consultation is going to be very important when it comes to talking about the nature of dispute itself and whether there is dispute or not, which is something that we're going to talk about later on.
Now, you mentioned you wanted to talk about something that I find very interesting. You gave us some talking points that you were going to have for this episode, and you said genocide as the highest form of the war on terror. What do you mean by that?
Okay, this is us getting outside of the case and going to more broad issues. So this is my legal guy away, legal hat, socialist hat. That's very interesting, and we can go back into the nature of the court more and
Mhm.
into dispute and into
Mhm.
intent later on. But from my perspective, the numbers, one might say the numbers 22,000, 23,000 does not add up when it comes to the Holocaust
Mhm.
or the Armenian genocide.
Mhm.
And the first thing that should be said to that, should we wait until there are a million people?
Mm.
So, and my personal opinion is different than the case itself. And I think that, yes, some people within the Israeli government are being genocidal. You know, there's difference between being genocidal, talking genocidal,
Mhm.
acting genocidal,
Mhm.
and actually doing it on the ground. That is very important to the issue of intent, and we're going to talk about that. But let's go back to the war on terror. Now, a lot of people would tell you, and I talked about Douglas Lane with that and different people, that it's a counterterrorism operation. People would defend it being a counterterrorism operation. And I would say that, okay, counterterrorism is something that we have criticized ruthlessly for 20 years. So, you know, there is people, there is a critical theory called critical counterterrorism theory.
Hmm.
And it's very interesting. It appeared in the in the last few years of the aughts of the 2010s, and it appeared because the nature of the state was changing as the war on terror was going on. So you have a problem with counterterrorism that is called the Robinson Crusoe problem. So Robinson Crusoe found himself on an island, and he was afraid because he was alone. And he imagined that every rock and tree and everything is someone attacking him. So the problem with the whole area of counterterrorism that it is based on rejection of solid history and the embrace of the ambiguous future that can bring me anything, you know. It can bring me aliens, it can bring me the end of times. This is where we leave science and begin entering into magic. And this is where there was a problem with the Israeli national security state and the US national security state, which had made these mistakes before during the war on terror. There was a problem, and the European national security state, that, yeah, you're by embracing anti-knowledge, you're making everybody either a terrorist, possible terrorist, or a possible terrorist sympathizer.
Mhm.
And that enlarges the national security state. Now, after October 7th, the national security state was enlarged.
Mhm.
So, what do I mean by genocide as the highest form uh, um, of the war on terror? There's something new here. Like Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck said that accusing Israel of genocide is a complete reversal of victims and perpetrators, and said that those who would commit or desire to do so, those who have the intent, if given the opportunity, are Hamas. So we have two problems here. First, there is mass punishment for the Palestinians for whatever Hamas did on October 7th. This is why we need international law to investigate that. And the problem is also you're punishing the Palestinians for what Hamas can do,
Mhm.
could possibly do. We are living in the world of possibilities. That is some Philip K. Dick Minority Report shit. You know, I'm gonna quote Joseph Massad. He's a he's a academic in the U.S., Jordanian Palestinian. If the identity of the terrorist is used by those who are enemies to each other, who call each other terrorists, the description becomes nothing more than a projective fantasy, as each party holds a mirror to the other, and what one party says is reflected directly back to the same party. In this sense, terrorism here works as Nietzsche's slave morality works. You're a terrorist, therefore I'm not a terrorist. Terrorism then is a discourse about a colonial identity. Masad says that, I'm going to say as a socialist, a bourgeois identity that wants to distinguish itself but always fails. And the discourse, what the discourse of terrorism seeks is to erase power relations as a central problem of violence. At the level of argument, then, the opposite of the discourse of terrorism is nothing but historical materialism, which is the antidote to it. So the stages of the war on terrorism, going back to 2001, there was a big problem with the war on terrorism when it comes to international law and with legality. War on terrorism has opened the Pandora box of illegality. So if according to Roman law or US law or whatever legal tradition, we can freeze the Constitution because of emergency, the law on terrorism has freezed morality because of an emergency itself.
Mm.
And this is where the problem starts. So in 2001, you had Bush before 9/11. He had a bad relationship with Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Everybody was saying Sharon was a bull in a china shop. The second intifada happens in the year 2000. The US, and that surprised me, the US issued what is called the Mitchell Report or the Sharm el-Sheikh Report. The city of Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, this is what is called after. The Mitchell Report was designated to study the history that led to Palestinian terrorist attacks within Israel. So they're not embracing the ambiguous future, they're embracing the solid history. So what happens next? 2001, 9/11. And I'm going to quote Ariel Sharon after 9/11. The fight against terrorism is an international struggle of the free world against the forces of darkness who seek to destroy our liberty and our way of life. Together we can defeat these forces of evil. And I was talking about the Pandora box of illegality that was opened with the war on terror. What illegal thing Ariel Sharon started to do after the war on terror? He started to construct or finish the construction of apartheid.
Mm.
Now, apartheid is crime number 2 in crimes against humanity after genocide in severity.
Oh, wow.
The ICJ advisory opinion of 2004 did not say that it was apartheid, but it said that it condemned settlements and their related regime. So it was a prequel to calling it an apartheid. What was Ariel Sharon's response? The ICJ 2004, the ICJ advisory opinion sends a destructive message to encourage terrorism and denounces countries that are defending themselves against it. So that's 21 years ago. And we're still hearing the same thing. That's the first phase of the war on terror. Then you had 2014. So if in 2001 you had one George Bush and one Osama bin Laden, in 2014 you have 1,000 George Bush and 1,000 Osama bin Laden. And you had Islamic popular frontism, young guys going to fight with ISIS. and you had Western-centric populocentrism. Everybody wants to become a Bush. The Assad dynasty wants to become part of the war on terror. The Barzani dynasty wants to become part of the war on terror. ISIS has solidified the capitalist national security state for the next 100 years. The only positive social experiment that happened after the rise of ISIS was Rojava, because it wasn't an experiment of national security capitalist state. It was a popular experiment. But other than that, Hezbollah wanted to fight against terrorism. Iran wanted to fight against terrorism. Erdogan wanted to fight. He was also in bed with ISIS somehow. I'm not an expert on that. Gene can tell you better. And that led, the 2014 led to more Stalinization of the war on terror, more and more. And then you had 2016 phase where the war on terror came back home, and you had Trump, January 6th, COVID, all of that. All of these enlargements of the national security state, as we all know. Then in 2022, we took a break from the war on terror, but we went into another authoritarian war that led to a little bit of a rejuvenation of Eurocentrism. And I'm going to talk about Eurocentrism in general here later on. And the militarization of Eurocentrism that led us to today. I think in 2023, after October 7th, neoconservatism became genocidal. Now, international liberalism, you can say international liberalism, and woke ideology, some parts of it have celebrated pogroms, and Gene talks about that extensively, October 7th. But neoconservatism has become genocidal. Now the war on terror, the Pandora box of illegality now is used to justify what could be a well-organized or a holistic program for genocide, or acts of genocide here and there. And also normalization with Israel becomes genocidal for the first time in history, because everybody who's calling for normalization for Israel in ultra-capitalist states in the Middle East, Arab states, are in it. As I wrote it down here, as genocide becomes normalized, normalization becomes genocidal. We have. I talked with Jean about Sarah Haider from the ex-Muslims of North America. She was talking about replacement theory with other people because of the Palestine rally, with white supremacists, because of the Palestine rally. This is how insane it becomes. And there is insanity on the other side, on the left. I'm not saying that this isn't, but this is what I meant as genocide as the highest form of the war on terror. I think the war on terror has reached that point here.
Well, this is where we are. Gene, did you want to add to that?
I mean, I would say, when we look at the history of genocide, and of course, genocide is a neologism and is also a legal term, but when we look at it historically, it is a process, right? We don't. You don't go from Hitler's election, in the early 1930s to the Holocaust overnight. It's a process that takes time, and where there are many dips and troughs on the road. For example, when the Nazis occupied Austria, there were popular anti-Jewish pogroms, which the Nazis actually reined in. because this is outside of the control of the state, and it's only during the crisis of war that we end up with this genocidal sort of this industrial scale genocide that takes place during the Holocaust. If we look at the Armenian genocide, another kind of inspiration behind the invention of the term genocide, it's not something that happens overnight. There is a long process of polarization, of the developing them versus us, and this growing national security state that comes to see all Armenians as being at least potential insurgents, because of course, the Ottoman Empire had dealt with a campaign of Armenian insurgents, from the 1890s onwards. This continues during the First World War, but then what you see is a process of radicalization and eventual, kind of genocidal politics turning into a, fully fledged state campaign of annihilation directed against the Armenian population. And when people look for comparisons to what's happening now in Gaza, I can't help but think of what happened to the Armenians, where they are, quote unquote, deported from their home regions into the middle of the Syrian desert, where they are massacred on the way, they are attacked on the way of moving to where they've been designated to go. And where they go, there's no aid or comfort for them when they arrive, and they end up in the desert starving to death. Obviously, this is not exactly the same as what happened during World War II, during the Holocaust, but we generally think of what happened to the Armenians as a genocide, and it is a process. And it's a process that went through several stages of sort of polarization, and until you get this kind of idea that the threat that the Armenians are presenting to the Ottoman Empire is not coming from simply insurgents, but is every Armenian is a potential insurgent. In fact, even if Armenians offered to convert to Islam, they were still regarded as a potential insurgent and subject to deportation. So we see this process of genocide it's not like an on or off button, and it definitely feels since October the 7th we've moved, let's say, one step further along this process towards a genocide. And what is constraining things at the moment? Well, Israel has to operate within the neighborhood, so simply just expelling everyone to Egypt is not feasible at the moment, because they need Egypt as well to keep the Palestinians locked in. So there is a kind of sense, I think, in the Israeli state that they actually don't really know what the end game is.
Well, that sounds frightening, right? Because we're talking about 9/11, that was 20 years, right? That went on.
And total war is, the kind of modern total war is in its very nature genocidal.
Yes.
Because, by its very nature, it's genocidal because it's not just about armies fighting, but it's about populations fighting. I mean, everybody likes whipping out, World War II references, and obviously many Palestinian supporters, compare Israel to the Nazis. But ironically, the Israelis compare the Palestinians to the Nazis as well. The example that they say is, well, look, they're like the Germans who got ethnically cleansed from Poland at the end of the Second World War by the Soviet army. They get what they deserve. So we end up with this kind of cycle of history. But the Holocaust is kind of, let's say, the ideal type of genocide. But most genocides we see in history, including the Holocaust, end up are a process. Like I said, the Holocaust didn't happen immediately once Hitler got into power. There were processes of polarization and increasing pressure being put on the Jewish community until during the crisis of war, you end up with the whole-scale industrialized slaughter of people. and the same with the Armenian genocide, although kind of with a lower technological base. And what we're seeing here in Israel-Palestine, obviously genocide cases, and Fakhry, you can perhaps speak more to this. They rely a lot on intent, right? It's a lot about intent, and you can have horrific events happening with or without intent. Look at the examples of the famines in the Soviet Union. There's a huge debate over whether those famines were intentionally directed at Ukrainian or Kazakh populations, or were just mismanagement. The result is the same. Lots of people died, but the debate circles around this question of intent. And what I think the Israelis have a problem with is that so much of their political class is speaking in very genocidal terms.
Yeah. The intent is a very interesting. So there are two things to intent. Okay, the first thing is you have the crime, the international crime within the 1998 Rome Statute that is called extermination. And what is the difference between extermination and genocide? Genocide, within the intent of genocide, is targeting a certain ethnic or religious or a national group. Extermination is you can kill 1 million people who have no relationship with each other, and it's not going to be genocide, it's going to be extermination. Whether it's for political purposes, I don't know if the Khmer Rouge comes into this category. And over here, the South African lawyers at the case said there is the statements, which Eugene talked about, and there is the level of destruction and death. And there's a huge level of destruction and death. And certainly there's a huge level of destruction. And the definition of the crime of genocide is broad. It's not about only killing.
No, you can commit a genocide without killing a single person. If you sterilize, let's say, all the women of a Native American community and don't kill anyone, that's still genocide.
That's genocide, exactly. And you have killing, you have causing serious bodily and mental harm. Some people would say that Gazans have been under serious mental harm for 16 years. I talked about that with a friend about 10 years ago, where she said genocide, and I said, no, not really. And she talked about that. And I'm going to talk about the bigger picture here in a second. And you have also, and the fact that nowhere is safe in Gaza. Also, that's related to mass killing, mass injury, mass bodily harm, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, whole and apart, mass internal forced displacement with cause to external displacement crossing international border. The 24-hour evacuation order was itself genocidal, one of the lawyers said.
Oh, wow.
For 85% of Gazans, nearly 2 million. Within the context of blockade and siege, the deprivation to access to food, water, humanitarian assistance, fuel, shelter, clothes, hygiene, sanitation, medical supplies. And also, that's very interesting, the destruction of Palestinian life and Palestinian society. This is my next point. So, even if we did not have this case, even if South Africa did not go to the court, you still have a historical context of how things got here. And you still have other definitions than genocide. First of all, you have apartheid. So apartheid is number 2 after genocide. The 1973 crime of apartheid in the 1973 convention, one of the acts of apartheid is genocide. That is very interesting. It's not mentioned in the Rome Statute, but they are correlated. One of the things that I write about when I write about international law is that apartheid is a de facto postponed right for one group to eradicate one group. If they're no longer good for us, we're going to eradicate them. Now we're dominating over them, but if they're no longer good for us, we're going to eradicate them. Similar to what Jean is saying, that there's a historical process here. Page 2 of the South African case, in page 2, the South Africans mentioned that it is important to place the acts of genocide in the broader context of Israel's conduct towards Palestinians in its 70-year-long apartheid. They say it's 70-year-long. Some people say it's 50-year. There are some differences there. 56-year belligerent occupation, 16-year blockade of Gaza, including with serious and ongoing violations of international law associated therewith, including grave breaches of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Now, the 2005 withdrawal from Gaza by Ariel Sharon was designed to create the Bantustan, the enclave of Gaza.
Okay.
Within the context that the peace talks has failed and there will not be a Palestinian state. It is very important to know that we're not saying here Zionism bad, Zionism Nazism, or Palestinians Nazism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the Zionist subject, not the liberal Zionist, but the pro-state Zionist subject in these days, is an evil subject. It's a tragic subject. So let's go back to how we got into this and how it is related to other terms which are sociocide and urbicide.
Okay.
The
What is
destruction-
sociocide?
Sociocide is the eradication of society and turning it into non-society. Urbicide is the eradication of the city.
Okay.
So when the British decided to, and Jean knows more about what came before that and the contentions between different groups within Palestine, but without the British, we wouldn't have gotten here. So the British when they came after the First World War, they came into an already capitalist bourgeois society within Palestine that had so many different groups, Arab-speaking different groups. And the Brits also started nurturing a parallel capitalist bourgeois society that was a little bit more connected to the world, a little bit more advanced, but it was a parallel society. The capitalist, now the left would say that the case is a case of colonization, a capitalist society, an evil capitalist society colonizing a pre-capitalist society. That's not the case. It's one capitalist society destroying another capitalist society. This is why I wouldn't say that it fits into the settler colonial. And I heard about Jean talking about that in several podcasts, or at least in one podcast.
We talked about it earlier today, that it's a little more complicated when talking about Israel. So why do you think it doesn't fit within the standard, settler colonial framework?
So in several continents, the British and the French empires introduced capitalism, for better or worse, in remote parts of the world. When it comes to the Brits getting into, and then the Zionists after that getting into Palestine, you already had capitalism because of Ottoman modernization and because of Mediterranean commerce. It's
Okay.
a Mediterranean society, the civil society. Now, there was a historical bet by the Zionists that this society would liquidate itself and go somewhere else, peacefully, if it's possible. That was the dream. Chaim Weizmann told Arthur Balfour in 1918, the present state of affairs would necessarily tend towards the creation of an Arab Palestine. It would not produce the result because the Fallah, the Palestinian peasant, is at least 4 centuries behind the times, and the Effendi, the Palestinian bourgeoisie, is dishonest, uneducated, greedy, as unpatriotic and inefficient. The problem was in 1984, created by the Brits. You had two parallel bourgeois societies, destroy or be destroyed by the time we reach 1948. This is why I say the Zionist figure is a tragic figure, because honestly, destroy or be destroyed. And the Palestinian civil society did not liquidate itself automatically. And it actually regrouped after the shoreside cities, civil society, working class, even capital got outside of Palestine. It regrouped. And this is how we started having the Palestinian question. Now, afterwards, you have the 1967 occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. You already found yourself as an occupier in front of new Palestinian cities, new Palestinian civil societies. What became the goal of Zionism next? The goal of Zionism was to turn the Palestinian civil bourgeois society to a non-society.
Mm.
And this is where sociocide comes. In the 1980s, you have the evangelical awakening, and you have the Islamic awakening. And it was beneficial for Israel to utilize it to turn the Palestinian society to a non-society or to a pre-capitalist society or a capitalist society with pre-capitalist traits. For example, you have Mordechai Kedar, an Israeli academic, saying that they needed, there was that the solution is the 8-state solution of the Palestinian Emirates, where Palestinians live in tribalistic emirates in different Bantustans. Now, once again, this is not unique to Zionism. Turning your opponents to a non-society is used everywhere. For example, the deplorables, the Trump voter.
Yeah.
They are not a non-society, the people who have voted for Trump. They didn't make a rational political decision. No, they're a non-society. Another example is George Kennan in the Cold War, at the beginning of the Cold War in 1946, in the Long Telegram, said that Soviet society is an amorphous mass. A generation later, George Lucas, Star Wars, would say the Soviet studio system is better, movie system is better than the studio system in Hollywood. There's much more freedom there for Soviet directors. So it's not unique to Zionism, and this is where there were attempts to, like, the Israeli establishment does not have a problem with Islam per se. It has a problem with militant Islam, not militant Islam that is used to that is used in its national security endeavors, funding some Islamist groups in some states. But it also doesn't have a problem with Islam is that it it needs that image, that Orientalist image of the Palestinian society as a pre-capitalist society, and it promotes for that, and it promotes for its realization. The
So,
other,
so
the other, yeah, I just want to finish with that. The other, for example, Fleur Hassan Naoum, the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, said in an interview during the war that there are no Christians and there are no churches in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because they need to promote for this. And another way of turning the Palestinian society to a non-society is through orbicide, which is the containment of the Palestinian city, the demolition of homes within Jerusalem and within other areas,
Mm-hmm.
the surrounding of Bethlehem and Nablus. That's a strategy to contain, you just mentioned George Kennan, to contain the Palestinian city or to destroy it completely, which, you know, South Africa might lose the case. It might not be proved that there was genocide. Certainly, there was herbicide in Gaza. The number of homes, the number
Yeah.
of the Gazan city was completely destroyed. And yeah, this is what I wanted to say about that. That even if we're talking about genocide, we should talk about apartheid, herbicide, and sociocide alongside as socialists talking about the Israeli national security state and its relationship to other national security states and even to groups like Hamas.
So, would you say your objection to the use of settler colonialism as a term is, even if it's being used well-meaningly, it doesn't apply because we're not talking about a capitalist society destroying a pre-capitalist society, but we're talking about two capitalist societies at war. And in a way, the use of the term settler colonialism buys into this notion that
Mhm.
Palestinians are a pre-modern society.
Hmm. Yeah, it buys into this notion, and here's the thing with the left. The left is a romantic movement, and by romantic I say a pre-capitalist. It looks at pre-capitalism, and there is a romanticization of Palestinian pre-capitalist peasant society before the Nakba. So you have a shoehorn theory there, or shoehorn theory, where Zionists want a pre-capitalist society, and the left is making a Palestinian pre-capitalist society as a romantic notion. And this is where my objection is. I have other objections to the schema of colonialism in general, where, and I'm going to discuss that more. The category of the settler colonial in the US is different than in the West Bank. I defended Kyle Rittenhouse when some leftist magazine in the Middle East called him a settler colonial with a gun, just like in the West Bank. No. My main critical theory here is critical counterterrorism theory, and what happened with Kyle falls within that. But the thing is, the decolonization argument is almost always right. For example, Sir Olaf Karo he was an administrator in British India. In the Cold War in 1953, he argued for Soviet colonization of Central Asia. Just like you turn your opponent to a non-society, we are all closet decolonizer just waiting to use the argument when in a rainy day. The Some of the journalists and politicians who are Arab Sunni said that what was his name? assassinated in early 2020. The Iranian leader Qasemi, and he was assassinated. They called him the Minister of Iranian Colonies. So we all use this, and you said that some people want to die by a machine gun, by a Cherokee in a baseball game. Another shoehorn here is that the Fox News crowd and the Fox News viewer have another fantasy of having a Gatling gun mowing down attacking Cherokees in Thanksgiving after October 7th. It had enlightened the neoconservative imagination again. It had brought a lot of the right to neoconservatism. So this is where the problem with the left and right takes place. Now, my problem with the settler colonial category in the U.S., not in the West Bank, is that it's an irredeemable category, and that's deeply anti-Marxist. Similar to my problem with Zionism is that humanity, for some doomerist Zionists, humanity is irredeemable after the Holocaust, and that's deeply anti-Marxist. This is why we should stay in the war, just like Jabotinsky said. Now, one of the craziest decolonization arguments that were said during the war was from Netanyahu himself, saying that it was the second war of independence. Israel wants to decolonize itself from Hamas. So it is crazy. Now, the left wants everything to be colonial, and the right wants everything not to be colonial, even what's happening in the West Bank. Mm-hmm. For example, let's go back to South Africa. In 2001, the Durban Conference of Anti-Racism between states, United Nations members, mm-hmm. talked about the legacy of colonialism. Mm-hmm. And Australia said a good thing. They said, well, colonial laws are the laws, the institutions, the democratic institutions, all of that we depend on, it comes from colonial laws. Mm-hmm. We have a colonial heritage. And we don't see as our colonial heritage as equal to genocide or apartheid. This is what they said. Like, you have to make a distinction here.
Yeah.
The problem with Australia and Canada and the US during the Durban Conference was they wanted to have the cake and eat it too. And they said, there's also no colonization in Israel. And this is where we have a problem. Now, the international law solves the issue of colonization within the context of the West Bank. That's the context that is impeding the Israeli society to become a post-colonial, settler colonial society, is the 1967 occupation. They solve it in the UN Charter, saying that all members should refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. There was a UN declaration that furthered upon that article in the UN Charter, saying that the territory of a state shall not be an object of military occupation resulting from the use of force in contravention of the provisions of the Charter. The territory of a state shall not be object of acquisition by another state resulting from threat or use of force. No territorial acquisition resulting from the threat or use of force shall be recognized as legal. Also, in the Fourth Geneva Convention, you have Article 49, saying that the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. Now, the international lawyers in after 1945, they were thinking about decolonization because of the British and the French empires. But they were also thinking about what would the international system without colonization look like, and what would happen to international peace and security if we start colonizing each other.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the image is not a capitalist society colonizing a pre-capitalist society or destroying it. That's a tragic thing, of course. That's not less tragic than the other case. But where capitalist societies occupying and colonizing each other and destroying each other. So this is where the West Bank is different and unique. And this is where Palestine in general is different and unique historically. Is that the international law is very important to stop us getting where we already got. Many people talk about, in 2003 terms, in 2001 terms, talk about the demilitarization of Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
The demilitarization of the Holy Land seems like a more important goal. Like, this is a ship that has sailed in 1948 when the Haganah was armed by Czechoslovakia and by many actors within Western countries. And, many people would say, like, the kibbutz is not a colony. It's like the kolkhoz. You mean the Brits has led to the Sovietization of the Holy Land? And turning it to another Armenia, Azerbaijan, where two people hate each other?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where it is unique from the issue of colonization.
Gene, did you want to add something there?
No, that's a lot of things to think about. I think, especially looking at the different historical contexts of who's being colonized. I mean, I think one of the big themes of British colonialism in the Middle East more generally during the interwar period is the fact that in many ways the British and the French reversed a process of social and political consolidation. You see this in Iraq, where they, instead of relying on the kind of urban elites in the society, they empower pre-modern tribal formations that were already on their way out, and thus kind of reinvigorated the pre-modern elements of Iraqi society, and we still live with that today. Look at the French in Lebanon. Not that sectarian divisions didn't exist before, but beginning in the 19th century, there was a process of what we might call nationalization in the Ottoman Empire, the imposition of a single system of law, a concept of unified citizenship, and that is reversed by the French as they establish a kind of sectarian regime based on reifying pre-modern sectarian identities, just as the British do by reifying tribal identities in Iraq, or even you can say the Republic of Turkey did it in Kurdish areas, where they invigorated tribal elements of society, arming them over those urban elements of society. So I think that's a really important characteristic of this. This is very different, I guess, from the 15th, 16th century colonization of the Americas or 19th century colonization of Australia. The British in the Middle East are literally trying. British and French are trying to roll back progress in these societies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Green Crane Committee that asked Lebanese, Palestinian, Syrians if they want one state, Jews, Christians, many other groups, if they want one state, they were still affected by Ottoman cosmopolitanism, the more cosmopolitan wings within the Ottoman nation building, and you talked about that with Sabadandi. And the British and the French has reversed that, and we should go back to the British and the French and to the empires. And I told Douglas Lane, yeah, we should differentiate between Eurocentrism that was created during empire in Europe and American exceptionalism that was created during Republic and the revival in the Republic after the Civil War. But the thing is, that's another thing that I wanted to say. Is it white supremacy what the Israelis are doing? Now, it's not. Not exactly. It could be, but it's something more important.
The Afro pessimists would disagree with you, but go ahead.
So, that I think we talked about that so I'm going to tell you what it is. It's as much bad as white supremacy. I think that's good for the Afro pessimist. It's Eurocentric supremacy. So Eurocentrism, if there is a good book that would be read back to back with Orientalism by Edward Said, it would be Samira Means Eurocentrism, 1993. After the fall of the Soviet Union and the unification of the world under the not American Republican thesis, but the American imperial thesis of globalization. Eurocentric supremacy is not built only on biological racism. It's an incoherent body of theory that is built upon the superiority of this part of the world, called Europe and sometimes the United States, over the rest of the world. It is built on biological racism sometimes, civilizational religion, Judeo-Christianity, and we're seeing that those days. And that civilizational religion was taken from the Holy Land in the Middle East. The creation of the European continent which depended upon taking Greece from the Middle East and adding it to Europe, and that caused a lot of Hellenomania, what is called, the Greek heritage of Europeans, and Orientalism, the idea that the world out there is dangerous, and it's full with Oriental despots. Now, this is the basic neoconservative line, except maybe even neoconservatives are better because they're trying to fix the world out there. They're some of them are cynical, some of them maybe are really trying to do that, are really well-meaning. Now, why socialists should be against the Eurocentric supremacy of, and by the way, Eurocentric supremacy can be practiced by white people, it can be practiced by Middle Easterners in the United States, there can be practiced by Middle Easterners close to the establishment and the national security state in the Middle East, and it can be certainly always practiced by a large segment of Israeli society. Why, as socialists, should we reject Eurocentrism? And it can be practiced by woke people, by the way. And I'm going to come back to that later. Right now, socialists should be against Eurocentrism because it mystifies why capitalism appeared in Europe for historical material reasons, and why it remained as the center of it. Because the problem with Eurocentrism is that it is about the right saying that No, the West does not need socialism because the West has reached perfection,
Hmm.
while the woke left is saying, no, 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 no. We should speak to the manager so we can make the West perfect and never achieve socialism.
Gotcha.
So this is where Eurocentrism. Let's, you know, a guy who lives in Israel, Quentin Tarantino, Django Unchained.
Hmm.
The U.S. is a wasteland of injustice and despotic, and only the enlightened European can come and help Django.
I never thought of that movie that way. That's actually very
We,
interesting.
the coastal elites,
Hmm.
we need Europe and to come to save us from the Confederacy or from the Trump voter or whatever it is. That is Eurocentrism.
Mm. What do you think of that, Gene?
Well, certainly, if you speak to American liberals, they often, and European liberals, they are, I think a key identity of Europe is feeling smugly superior, that we're not as bad as the Americans. And one of the things about American liberals is look how much more progressive they are in Europe. But the reality is a little bit more complicated than that. For example, you know, we talk about racism in the United States, but Europe has long, very serious issues of racism against different groups. Look at the French, the way Arabs have been
Oof.
treated in France, the way Muslims have been treated in Germany and
And
Britain.
and to your point about the way Arabs have been treated in France, you know, I don't know if you guys remember that. I don't know where you were when that happened, Gene, if you were in the States at that time or not. But I remember when the whole Charlie Hebdo thing happened,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and people acted as if for no good reason, some Arabs got a little bit angry and wanted to go, crazy at this magazine. And there was a lot of ignoring of the conditions in which they were living in
Mhm.
France at the time, and kind of the propaganda that magazine had been making.
Mhm. Exactly. And, you know, when it comes to, I was talking about with Douglas Lane about that uh, on something that was published October 5th. We talked about Charlie Hebdo. That there is a mass hysteria
Mhm.
that comes when a terrorist attack, a school shooting, were
Mhm.
tragic events that are seized by central powers, seized by the national security state. And
And
this is,
and
mhm,
that's
yeah.
what October the 7th has been seized on
Mhm.
by the Israeli establishment, right?
But has it been a public relations failure? I'm asking. I don't know the answer. I'm asking you two. Do you think it's been a public relations failure the way they tried to seize on October 7th?
Well, I certainly think, over the last 10 years in Israel, and Fakhry can probably speak to this better than I can, you've had, just like in other advanced capitalist countries, the rise of right-wing populism.
Mhm.
And to a certain extent, now you have a diplomatic corps and a political elite that doesn't speak the language of liberalism, and that makes liberals in the West feel comfortable.
Mhm.
And you can see this when they say the quiet part out loud. And that's why it's a public relations disaster to a certain extent, because the cadre that the Israeli state has at the top and in its diplomatic corps are now deeply imbibed with this kind of nationalist populism,
Mhm.
which is all over the West, except, of course, in Israel, this nationalist populism has, you know, uh, an extremely deleterious effect on the Palestinian population, because Israel is occupying the West Bank and Gaza Strip.
So this is very important. I think that acting as if Hamas has came out of outer space is as much as disingenuous as acting as if Trump has came out of space, out of
Mhm.
space.
That's fair.
In the sense that, okay, 2016. What was the 10 years later? 2006, the Palestinian election. Hamas won. Why? Rise of populism in the world started much earlier than what is always said. It started in the 2000s and maybe even before that. You know, in Italy, new fascists maybe in the 90s started, and the idea is, it's about us wanting to wake up in the morning and wanting to. Sorry for saying that, to kill Jews or something like that. No, 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 no. It's not about that.
Mhm.
It's anti-Semitism is the anti-racism of the Republican Party. You know, anti-Semitism is bad. We should fight it, but unfortunately, the establishment of the Republican Party are using it the same way the Democratic Party is using anti-racism. Hamas came because the neoliberal order was already failing in the early 2000s. And this is what led Hamas to come in. And this is what led to us relegating our gun rights, our rights for national liberations to a petite bourgeois organization like Hamas. It is the liberal order that does not accept uh, any line outside of it. And the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, did not find itself in contradiction with the Israeli state. It found itself in contradiction with all states, because all Arab states were saying pan-Arabism, but the most important thing was the local bourgeoisie.
Mhm.
And any utopian project from the 20th century, no, let's put an X on that. And this is the problem that happened. And it's easy to say, why would the Palestinians sit with the Israelis on a table? Wouldn't the Kurds or the PKK sit with the Turks on the table? Why don't you just give your guns away? We are all Republicans when it comes to the guns of our national liberation movement, but we're Democrats when it comes to the guns of another
Mhm.
national liberation movement. And I saw that, like, I saw that after October 7th, like, yeah, gun rights, American Constitution, the United Nations has legalized armed actors, national liberation movements. Even the PLO was invited to the 1977 conference on the additional protocol to the Geneva Convention. Why? Because they did not want national liberation movement to do October 7th. What happens in the 80s and the 90s? They end with national liberation movements. The mere existence of them are illegal. And um, this is what led us to this moment, to the moment of any disobedience is bad until a very bad, very misrepresenting disobedience takes place. Aha, you see, any disobedience is bad.
Well, I do want to hit on your last point, which I'm glad you left for last. And I do also want to let people know that are watching the show, you are enjoying free champagne. As you guys know, we usually only go an hour. Anything over that, we usually go to the patron only champagne room. But because we only have a limited time with not only our guests, but also Sheen Bajlan, who is a very busy man. There's a reason why he hasn't been on the show. It's not because he's mad at anybody. He's just, look at his eyes.
I'm
Look how
tired.
big- Look at that. He's a busy man. Um, the poverty of anti-millennial leftism. And you mention the very good Jean Bajlan in that statement. So I will start by talking to Jean on this. Jean.
No, don't ask me. Please, Fakhry, go ahead.
So Gene wrote for Compact. He wrote an article about the poverty of anti-imperialism. This is where I was watching and reading simultaneously Spencer Leonard
Okay.
saying anti-imperialism is Maoist bullshit, which felt like a slap on the face. And then yeah, it's like those guys are saying some meaningful stuff, you know. And this is why was a transformative. Last summer was a transformative phase in my relationship to Marxism. One of them is one of the bases of that transformation was like, yeah, anti-imperialism is not left-wing; it's right-wing, or in most cases, or in many cases, to be fair, it's right. And um,
Why do you say that?
because Eisenhower was anti-imperialist, because South Africa was anti-imperialist. It was anti British imperialism, and then in the Cold War to talk about Chinese imperialism and Soviet imperialism. Some Trots are anti-imperialists, yeah, because of Soviet imperialism, not because of U.S. imperialism. And the U.S. empire thing, it's more complicated. I think that there are 3 points here to be made, especially in the Middle East. Yassin Saleh al-Hajj is a Syrian writer. He said, empire, mainly here American empire, but it could be also Russia, it could be someone else, especially the situation in Syria, it could be Turkey. Empire robs sovereignty from the people, the sovereignty to make war, to defend themselves. The capitalist national security states robs politics from the people, politics. The jihadi Islamists rob society from the people. So anyone who's not looking at these 3 things is fishy simultaneously. So if you want to look only at the U.S. empire without looking at the other 2 things, you have a problem, and you're a popular frontist. If you're a neoconservative who is only looking at Islamism and jihadism, you have serious issues. If you're only focusing on the local capitalist state, and this is a problem that happened with, for example, disposing Saddam or disposing other leaders, regime change. You know, we can take out this guy. They're not even taking out the capitalist state. They're taking out the state in its current form. You have some fishy issues, and what I've noticed after October 7th is anti-millennial leftism is a little bit impoverished when it comes to this issue. Why? Because there isn't enough. There is a lot of focus on the next crazy thing that leftists or woke leftists are going to do. But Jean said, okay, what if neoconservatives are right? Are you going to still defend the indefensible? What if some dictator is really doing some bad things out there? Are you going to start defending it? Or you can start defending empire within the core of the empire and the bodies of armed men within your empire and the national security state. That's Jean's thesis. What if the left is right this time, and what if we are heading to a genocide? Maybe the left is hysterical, but what if it's right? And I've seen so much focus on the left is crazy. You know, it's It's trans people celebrating October 7th beheadings. That's
Yeah.
no. We can ruthlessly criticize the left, but
Mhm.
there is an indefensible
Mhm.
third world regime that is called Israel, an ultra capitalistic state, if you're a socialist, and you have Atlanticism on the shores of the Mediterranean and the Red Sea by Biden. And you also, like, it combines pro Russia anti imperialists and pro NATO people to not to be vocal against the American and the Israeli establishment to that extent and to focus on crazy rally people
Mhm.
because you're condoning or not speaking against Atlanticism against on the shores of the Eastern Mediterranean in the same time that you are going along with the denazification of Gaza campaign. That's the worst of both worlds, of the pro-Russia people and the pro-NATO people.
Mhm.
And this is where I think that anti-millennial leftism is impoverished a little bit, but I can understand anti-millennial leftism as an important thing, just like anti-imperialism is an important thing, and just like the criticism of Islamism is an important thing. It's important because it at least points beyond bourgeois politics. But if we want to be stuck about what people are doing at the rallies, we're doing bourgeois outrage.
Oof. Oof. Gene, what do you have to say about bourgeois outrage?
Well, I think one of the interesting tendencies I noticed amongst, and I'm not going to name names, but there's a certain variety of leftist who is, let's say, contrarian, and one aspect of that contrarianism has been to oppose identity politics. But as soon as October the 7th came along, a certain number of these contrarian leftists suddenly became the biggest defenders of Zionism and Jewish identity politics. So I think a lot of the critiques that they had of identity politics just rang hollow, and they just seem to be engaging in base contrarianism. If most people on the left are sympathetic to the Palestinians, they're like, well, actually, what we're going to defend Israel's right of national self-determination, which you know, just like the same people who will mock black identity politics uh, are going in and defending Zionism.
I sent you a video recently of we talked about this on the show this morning. Well, I recorded it this morning. It was a left forum, and the guy said the biggest blow to capitalism is going to be when we destroy the state of Israel. And I sent that to you, and you just
I mean, I saw that, and
yeah.
I kind of think it's a little bit sad because it's delusional, right?
Mhm.
And in a way, I think people in the United States who are thinking that,
Mhm.
they're kind of exporting their own political responsibilities to the Palestinian people. They're like, well, we're useless and can't do anything, so we're going to be the cheerleaders
Mhm.
for the Palestinians
Mhm.
who are going to, strike this death blow.
The emotional cheerleaders, right? We can't do anything. No one's going over there to fight.
Yeah, I mean the emotional cheerleaders for it. So it feels like, I mean, I'm sure it's well intentioned, but it feels like uh, putting your political responsibilities as someone who lives in the imperial core on a people who are not struggling for socialism, not struggling against capitalism,
Mhm.
but are struggling against basically imminent destruction. And uh, to think that under these conditions, any type of liberation
Mhm.
is going to be a blow to capitalism is, I think, maybe delusional. In the best of all possible worlds, we might hope for, a binational capitalist state with, shared citizenship rights for everybody within that state, right?
Mhm.
But that's still going to be a capitalist state. And in fact, that might reinvigorate the Israeli capitalist state,
Mhm.
if if Palestinians are integrated. But what it won't do
Mhm.
is strike a blow against capitalism. Now, if you ask me if I think that having a binational state, capitalist state with everybody with equal citizenship rights is progress, I do. I think that would be a positive development, and I think it would be the basis for future struggles
Mhm.
in the Middle East. But to believe that that the outcome of this struggle can be anything is going to bring socialism seems a little bit delusional to me. I don't know what you think, Fakhry.
Yeah, and we talked about that before the podcast, and we talked about that in Twitter. I talked about that with Jason before the podcast, and with you, Gene, in Twitter. I think I wrote outsourcing the revolution to Arab sweatshops. This is where I talked
You
about
were the
this.
one that wrote that. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool.
So
Oof. Yeah, that hit me when I saw that. That I'm not gonna lie, man. When I saw that comment, that hit me. Outsourcing the revolution to Arab sweatshops. Is that the American way, though? Is that the American left way of looking at the third world struggle?
yeah, this is this is where I think that if you ask many Palestinians on the street, they wouldn't. They would tell you that we live in a different paradigm completely than
Mhm.
leftists in the West and in the U.S. But I think we. I'm gonna. This is something that I've already mentioned before the podcast. That one of the best episodes in podcasting history is with Norman Finkelstein on this show, and I was surprised for that. Finkelstein had a quarrel with the BDS since 2010. Like
He's not a fan. He is
I
not a
thought
fan of
I thought
BDS.
that those guys love each other. Then
Mm-mm.
I thought about that, and I listened to him, and he's talking about every time one talks about the one state solution, he said to the extent,
Mm.
well, we should have a one state for everyone on earth,
Mm.
with a one state solution. So the thing is that prompted me to think about a lot of Palestinians, a lot of pro-Palestinians, and it made me understand that we are on the African American path of development. We won culturally, but we were very hurt severely materially, which is one of the main themes of This Is Revolution.
It is.
And yeah, we have a show on Netflix. We have 2 million internal displaced persons within
Mhm.
Gaza, and we have a show on Netflix.
Well, I don't know if you saw this. I was talking to a friend of the show, Bertram Cooper, who has been doing some writing in the Atlantic and the New York Times, and somehow we got on actually this Israel-Palestine topic, and then we got into the whole Obama thing, and he goes, people forget that Barack Obama signed that deal real quick. And he and Michelle have been very vocal about the fact that they feel that it is through the culture industry that victory will be won. And if you look at the culture industry, and we have to finally start saying these things and get away from the term culture war. The liberals have won the culture war. I believe it is Eugene that posted there's a new female director for one of the Star Wars movies. And I think the quote that you showed was her saying, finally, we can get a Star Wars story from a female perspective, which I thought was very shocking. I was like, hadn't you watched the last 3 feature films, it was the female Luke Skywalker going on her hero's quest to find family. But again, we joke about all these shows that are so quote unquote woke and the changing of certain Marvel characters to people of color or women. The liberals won the culture war. That being said, we need to also say it looks like the right has won the political battles. Abortion in the Supreme Courts, the Supreme Court. How many states do we see with far, even like Christian nationalist state houses? How many right-leaning countries do we have in the world? You said 2016 on. So when we talk about these culture war battles, and I think it's really important that you laid that out. Culturally, it looks like the programs are on the right side. But what does that mean politically when people are still being bombed back to the Stone Age, right? How many millions of people are going to be displaced? Are there any nations in the world that are raising their hand to take a bunch of refugees? And this isn't the only place in the world where this is happening. Currently, where are the Rohingya going? You know what I mean? So it is sad to me that it feels like these cultural battles are where people really want to, dig their heels in and fight, when it is the political ones, the real substantive ones, that we're losing. And that's coming at a hell of a cost, as we see right now, as just what we're talking about, just Israel, Palestine, this death toll continues to rise.
And I don't want to be critical of people who are, supporting Palestinians, because especially in the United States and in the West, there is a cost to it. People are losing jobs and being removed. But it does also feel that this conflict is being dragged into the vortex of our culture wars in the West, where it becomes, a symbol of, as a shorthand for which side of politics you are, rather than people perhaps looking at it in and of itself. Maybe that's an unfair assessment, but it does feel that so much of our discourse on international politics just is run through the kind of mill of our own culture war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the culture war is, people are viewing the conflict through the lens of the culture war, and this therapeutic decolonization, comfortable therapeutic decolonization, is being imposed on a situation that is out there in the real world. It's not, and I've said that one of the things that make me happy about the South Africa case is that maybe it's the time to set aside the university people and the Daily Wire people and let the big boys and the big girls talk in a court of law.
And at the end of the day, whatever outcomes come out of this, I'm skeptical as if anyone will be brought to justice. But if it forces the Israeli state to pull back on the barbarism that it's unleashing on Gaza, if it acts as a counterbalance to that violence, I think it's worth it in the end.
Yeah.
I want to say that, when people say that the end of Israel is going to be the end of capitalism and its defeat, and, I remember another Iranian crazy communist who said, we will start the global socialist revolution after the mullahs go away. This nationalistic centric communism. And black internationalists, they did not outsource the revolution. They went to Algeria and they protested atomic tests. This is what they did back then in the day. So it's a return to true internationalism is needed here. And I don't see it. And Jean talked about that. Like they are defending another nationalism. That's the brand of internationalism of the left. There is no this holistic approach of maybe we should transcend this paradigm, and maybe we should think about this. Just like I said, told you, the whole area of the Middle East, there are different layers of why it got there.
Hmm.
That multifaceted thinking does not exist, not on the left, certainly not on the right. There is a poverty to anti-imperialism, but there is a poverty to anti-Islamism. Huge poverty to anti-Islamism. Like it's not that anti-Islamism is Islamophobia and it's immoral and we should eradicate it completely because of the cultural left wants that and they're sensitive. No, it's an epistemological crisis that you think that you're gonna decolonize the world as a neoconservative from Oriental despots. Decolonize Ukraine from Russia and decolonize the Middle East from a fake caliphate that was there for 2 years between Iraq and Syria. It's uh, it's these are different. We're jumping between different types of popular frontism, but we're not focusing on the main task.
Well, as we come to a close, I want to first of all thank you, Fakhry, for taking the time to talk with us. Gene, also always thank you so much, brother, for putting this show together and taking time out of your extremely busy day. I won't get into the work that you do now outside of the university system, but in my opinion, it's extremely important work, and you're a saint. But that being said, in all seriousness, um, what can we hope to look forward to, and how realistic do you see this, Fakhry? This, and I apologize for saying your name wrong. How realistic do
It's a
we see this this South African case actually bearing some fruit and being able to stop the bombing campaign?
I'm not optimistic about that being the thing that would stop the bombing campaign,
Hmm.
but I see the case as a part of a historical process to against the post-World War II consensus
Hmm.
that everybody is, everybody hates it.
Hmm.
Whether you're Middle Eastern, white or black, nobody likes the post-World War II consensus. It's it's a consensus that was built upon the American industrial military complex and upon Stalinism. You know,
Hmm.
Israel is having its great patriotic war, and the West now is having its great patriotic war in Ukraine, and Russia has its great patriotic war in Ukraine also. And the accusations of Douglas Murray
Yeah,
is
British.
using tired Anglo triumphalism after World War II to
Mhm.
explain his hideous. Like, no, Mother F, you did not win World War II. It was Muslims in the Soviet army and the Free French army that won the World War II. Sorry about that. Of course, there was a lot of sacrifices from the British working class.
Mhm.
But a return to the British working class and people on the ground is what I hope for,
Mhm.
and I hope that I'm not looking at the Middle East now. I'm looking at the U.S. Like
Mhm.
where we're going
Mhm.
when it comes to the question of establishing a new party in the U.S.
Mm.
That does not have uh, the structural problems, reprehensible problems of the Republican Party, and that does not have the authoritarian problems of the Democratic Party, and how the Democratic Party is populist protest of the world while not doing anything, really, especially in the lower, not in the establishment itself, but in the lower part of. So this is where my hopes at, like uh, changes within uh, societies in Europe and in North America, something that I mentioned in my compact article. This is where I have a lot of hope, not only for Palestinians, but for all humanity.
Mm.
And to get out of this nationalistic paradigm and to get rid of these frontiers where, I can't visit Lebanon. Lebanese cannot visit Jerusalem. Uh, Egyptians cannot visit Erbil, and no. We need real cosmopolitanism, not ruthless cosmopolitanism. And I do have a Kurdish friend from Iraqi Kurdistan who sent me a passport with all 22 Arab countries, the United Arab States. It's not Arab as ethnically Arab. It's diversely ethnic. But why she sent that to me? Because there is a belief that we're bigger than our nationalities.
Mm.
There is something bigger out there than our nationalities. There is a true process of participation in bourgeois society and participation in the working class. Do I sound utopian? I might, but it's definitely more positive than the destruction of Israel will bring about socialism.
We need a little utopian vision every now and then to remind us why we believe what we believe. His name is Fakhry B.F. Taha. You know the other gentleman as Mean Jean Bajlan. I am Jason Myles, your host, and we are
Out.
or not.